This is Annie from Hoop Sisters, and we're really excited to start with our mystery quilt for 2015. Wish I could show it to you, but it is a mystery quilt. But what I can do is, once you have your week 1 files, you will be able to, this is kind of the layout of where it goes. You will be making 4 of this block. This is where it is going to be located in the mystery quilt, so you have a little bit of a clue going on here. And if you were to take that block, you could make bunches of them and end up having a 1-block wonder quilt, a full-size quilt or whatever you want, and we'll give you instructions and fabric requirements on how many blocks to make and how much fabric to buy in case you want to make a twin, a full, a queen, or a king-size quilt. So you'll have that information as well. And then there's just an example of what you could do if you wanted to do a table runner for this. So although it's beautiful, used inside the mystery quilt, it is also a wonderful 1-block wonder. So if you haven't already, go ahead and print out the instructions, and we're going to go over them a little bit right now. And on the second page, you'll see where we have our cutting instructions, so you know how to cut it. And I like to take this, and we suggest on here to put your little fabric swatch on there. What I've done also to make it easier while I'm cutting out my fabric is I've taken a 5-inch, this particular video is going to show 5-inch blocks, so I've circled that so I don't accidentally look in the wrong place and maybe cut my fabric wrong. So here I have my fabric 1, my fabric 2, my fabric 3 all selected and pick out, and every week that I do a video you're going to see a different color. That way it kind of gets your imagination and maybe sparks a little interest and give you ideas of different colorways that you could go with. But I have my cutting instructions circled. I have my fabric shown on there, my fabric swatch. I have my fabric listed. I've got my hoop scissors mini. And this is an optional step that you'll see is that we also have an optional wool batting that you can add to it. This is my fabric D. These are all my different fabrics. So I have my different fabrics with my matching thread. And the ones that needed an extra bobbin, I have those also as well. And I have my hoop, all hooped, my battleizer are hooped, and I think I'm ready to go. So let's get started on this quilt block. Okay, we are ready to start our first block for the 2015 mystery quilt. What you're going to do is, first thing is hoop your battleizer. I have a neutral thread in the needle, and that can be any one of the threads that you're using for some of the other sewing, just one of the lighter colors, or you can just choose a gray thread. And I have just embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, and I'm going to hit the start button, and we are going to go ahead and sew a placement stitch. Okay, the placement stitch has been sewn. I wanted to just quickly show you the instructions this year. Typically we put photographs in a slideshow, but this year we thought we would try, and comment and email us and let us know what you think about this, but we just have also added the photograph plus also the diagram of what your machine does for each step. So anyway, our second step is an optional step. You don't have to do it, but you're going to be putting water-soluble thread in the needle only, and you're going to take a piece of wool batting square, and we've given you the dimensions in a couple of different places, and the machine with water-soluble thread is going to sew a zigzag, and I'm just reading it to you. If you choose to skip adding the wool batting layer, you can certainly do that, and you would just go on to the next step, which is step 3. So let me put my wool batting down and my water-soluble thread in the needle, and we will go ahead and do the zigzag stitch to attach it to the battleizer. Alright, I have my wool batting in place, and as you can see, once you cut it the size that we tell you in the instructions, you're then going to place just about a 1/4 of an inch, take an iron and just kind of use the heat of your iron along with the pressing cloth to make it nice and flat right around the edge. And what that does is it leaves plenty of room so that your the presser foot can go through and make that zigzag stitch through there. And the reason that we like adding the wool batting is because it gives your quilt block and your quilt lots of texture. So if you just want to experiment, if you've never tried it before, we really encourage you to try it. Do a little sample block, doing it both ways just to see. But I think once you see how beautiful it looks, I don't think you're going to want to go back. So I'm sewing this using the water-soluble thread. I just kind of like to keep it in place while it does that. You could probably let go and see what happens, but it's kind of like a little added insurance policy. So that's step 2, just stitching with water-soluble thread, a zigzag stitch to attach the wool batting to the battleizer. For step number 3, we're going to continue with that water-soluble thread, and we're going to put the background fabric over the top of the wool batting. We're going to make sure that it's centered, and we're going to hold that in place using the water-soluble thread. So let me get it in place. And I'd like to just peek under it, make sure I have it placed correctly. And we'll go ahead and it's just going to do a straight stitch to hold it all in place. That was easy. Now we're on to step 4. And for step 4, I'm going to change the thread to thread A in the needle only. We're going to leave the embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, so we don't have to change that. We only need to change the thread to thread A, and then the machine is going to do some cross stitch stitches. Okay, I have my thread A in, so we're going to let the machine sew some cross stitch. You know, it wasn't too long ago that I used to do cross stitch by hand, and that would have taken me at least an hour and a half. So thank goodness for embroidery machines. We're now on step number 5, and I have water-soluble thread in the needle only. And we're going to sew some placement stitches so we know where to lay our first piece of fabric. Okay, I'm going to read right from the instructions. It says continuing with water-soluble threads. I don't have to change the thread. It says place fabric 3 right side up over placement stitch and sew the tack down stitches. So we're going to take our fabric 3 and lay it right over the top of that. But if you forget which one's fabric 3, just turn to your second page where you have your fabric. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab that fabric, and we will place that over the section where we've done the tack down stitch. So I'm going to lay it just like that, kind of peeking under, make sure I've got everything covered. And we're going to do a tack down stitch with water-soluble thread. As you can see right there, it's stitched it twice. And that's because we're going to cut right close to the stitching there so that it can be finished as a machine applique. So let me bring this forward. And anywhere where we're going to, that's at the bottom edge or any outside edge when we're doing our trimming, we're going to leave at least a ½ inch there. So I'm going to use my hoop scissors to cut that. Around this curved edge where we're going to place another piece of fabric over the top of it later, I'm going to leave, about an 1/8 inch. Right here where it's going to basically be a seam allowance, you'd leave 1/4 inch behind, just like you would if you were sewing anything else using a 1/4 seam allowance. Where it's stitched twice around here, that is where we're going to cut right up to the stitching. And later on, one of the steps will be to sew a satin cover stitch over that. So I'm using my hoop scissors mini to get right up close to that stitching. So there we have completed step number 6. All right, for step 7, I have changed my water-soluble thread to just a neutral thread, and I just happen to be using like a yellow gold color thread that matches this. This is my fabric 2. You really can't tell which side's right from wrong. I'm having a little trouble with that, but it's such a beautiful fabric that I don't think it's really going to matter. I'm going to lay it right sides down. Of course, some fabrics there would definitely be a difference. Since I'm going to move this forward just to show you what I mean. Since this fabric is going to come way up here, I would recommend having the end of your slice of fabric at this end rather than up here to make sure that you cover that. So let's put this back in place and get started. I have my fabric 2 right sides together with the other fabric. So let's go ahead and sew a seam. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, and now what we're going to do, I'll bring this forward again so you can see. And we're going to flip our fabric 2 so it's right side up, and then we're just going to do a little finger press right there. And then step 8, we're going to do the tack down stitch to hold that in place, and we're going to leave the same thread in there, and we can do that until we get to the outside edge of the block. And again, I hope you noticed that they did do a double stitch right around the area where we're going to be trimming as if for applique. So let me go ahead and trim this. I'm going to bring my hoop forward. I'm cutting 1/4 inch where the next seam will go, and about a little less than that, about 1/8 inch on the bottom side, and where it stitched the straight stitch twice, we're going to trim close just like you would for applique. And we've now completed step 8. For step 9, we're going to take our fabric 1 and we're going to lay it right sides down. And again, with the most of the length of your strip of fabric going out over the top of there. And then still with the neutral thread, we're going to stitch a seam. Alright, I'm going to bring this forward again so you can see it. And so now we're going to flip this fabric right side up, finger press, and step 10 is sewing a tack down stitch. However, since we are on the very edge of the block, we're going to be switching to water soluble thread, and we're going to do that so that when you sew the blocks together, if for some reason that tack down stitch is showing, it's not a problem because you've used the water soluble thread. And we recommend the Vanish Light water soluble thread. Alright, so we have our water soluble thread in there. Move the hoop back into place because I had moved it forward to show you. And then we're going to sew the tack down. Alright, same trimming just like we did on the very first piece. Since we're on the outside edge, you're going to want to leave about 1/2 inch, about 1/8 inch down here. And at the very top, you're going to trim close to stitching. Kind of an awkward angle for me, but I wanted you to see it. Alright, so let's refer to our instructions. Alright, our instruction says to continue with water-soluble thread, and we're going to place fabric 2 right side up and we're going to sew the tack down stitch. And just to make sure I remembered which one I'm using for fabric 2, I'm going to go to that page number 2. And I see which one it is. Just making sure. If I'm going to make a mistake, I don't want to do it on the camera. So we're going to just lay right sides up right over this area, making sure everything is covered. And with the water-soluble thread, we're going to go ahead and we're going to sew a tack down stitch. And the trimming after step 11 is you're going to leave about a quarter of an inch, or sorry, a half of an inch on both sides of the block. Let me move this forward. Whoops, I hit the wrong button. And the curved edge, we're going to use our Hoop Sisters Mini, and we're going to trim right up to the stitching. Alright, we've completed step 11. We are doing step 12 next, and I have placed my thread D, which for me is, it's called Aran Green thread. So it's my thread D, and we're going to do some stitching here. We're still using the embroidery bobbin thread and the bobbin. We've just changed to our thread D in the needle. I'm going to stop it because I think I have a thread tail here I'd like to clip. But it's going to do a decorative stitch all around the outside perimeter, and it's going to also do a really cool stitch on the middle Dresden plate. Right here you can see what we did for step 12. We did some stitching here. We did some neat stitching in the center, and also the same decorative stitch up in the towards the top. For step 13, we are placing thread A in the needle only, and we're going to sew some embroidery. For step 14, I'm going to put my thread C in the needle only, and we're going to do a little bit more embroidery. For step 14, you can see the embroidery that it's stitched there. Now for step 15, we're going to place thread B in the needle only, and it's going to sew a satin cover stitch. Alright, here we have finished step 15. Now it's time to move on to step 16, which is adding the backing fabric to the back. So it's optional. You can use a little Sulky KK 2000 and spray it on the back of your backing fabric if you want to. And then you're going to have to carefully place it so it is centered over the stitching on the back. And I already have the water-soluble thread in the needle. So now we will carefully put this back on the machine. I always peek underneath. Call that a Dunlop in Hoop Sisters terminology, in case that fabric happened to flip over and ends up getting stitched on that way. But with the water-soluble thread in the needle only, and we still have our embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, we're going to go ahead and we're going to sew a basting stitch around the perimeter of the block. And again, we're using the water-soluble thread so that when you sew all the blocks together, if it happens to be showing, that way you don't have to worry about it. You can just get it wet, or when you wash the quilt, it'll go ahead and disappear on you. So now we have our backing fabric on, and one of the things that you're going to have to remember, and I just happen to have mine off anyway, is to turn off your automatic thread cutter if your machine has one. And moving forward, we are going to be matching our bobbin thread with our needle thread for the rest of the quilt block. And before you begin sewing each next step, you're going to be bringing the bobbin thread to the top. So let me go ahead and get ready for step 17, and then you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, for step 17, you're going to put thread A in the needle and also in the bobbin. And before you hit the start button, you're going to do a needle down, holding onto that needle thread, and a needle up. You're going to pull your bobbin thread to the top. You're going to make sure your needle cutter is turned off. And then you're going to hit the start button, and it's going to do some quilting. By doing those steps that I just mentioned, it will make for a much neater looking back to your quilt block. For step 18, I have thread D in the needle and in the bobbin. And I'm going to do a needle down, needle up to bring the bobbin thread to the top. And then the machine is going to be stitching an outline stitch around the satin stitch. Doesn't that look good? I think it looks so pretty. I bet you want to see the back. Okay, here it is. So far, there's the back. We are on our final step, and that is a quilting step. It'll do some quilting in here. And with that step, you're going to place your quilting thread, excuse me while I reach to try and put this on, your quilting thread in the needle and also in the bobbin. And since we have our backing on, we're going to do needle down, needle up, so we have a pretty back. And just hit the start button and let it do the quilting for you. Okay, now if it's time to show you how to trim the block using the trimmer by George. First thing you need to know is you need to know that if you are going to be, whatever side you're going to be sewing another block to, you're going to trim using the trimmer by George. If, for instance, this is the corner of your block, then you're just going to cut through all the layers 1/4 inch, so you can turn the trimmer by George upside down like so, mark it 1/4 inch, and then cut it. So I think I will do that with this side. And again, that's only if you're going to put binding on that part of the quilt. And if this was a corner of your quilt, you would do it then again on this side. I might turn this into a little pillow, so I think I'll just go ahead and trim it like that. Now, if you're going to be adding the optional border to this mystery quilt, then what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to trim all 4 sides using the trimmer by George, which I'm going to show you right now. What you're going to do is you're going to take the crimped edge of your trimmer by George, you're going to put it underneath the fabric just like that, snug it right up to it and lay it down, and do a gentle tug and just visually check to make sure there's nothing peeking out. And then you're going to use a 60mm rotary cutter, and you're going to cut that away. Then what's left, the battleizer, as you can see, is gone, and so is the backing fabric, but you still have the fabric on the front. And then again, you're going to flip the trimmer by George 2.0 upside down, and you're going to cut the fabric 1/4 inch, just like you would do a 1/4 inch seam on a quilt. You can watch as I go ahead and do it to the other side as well. Trim it nice and snug. 60mm rotary cutter. Whoops. Trim that fabric away. And then you would go ahead, turn this upside down and cut that 1/4 inch. And there you have a completely trimmed up quilt block. This is what it looks like on the front. On the back side, this is where other blocks will be joined, so you've trimmed it right up to the edge using the trimmer by George. And this side shows all 3 layers 1/4 inch from that basting stitch. So that's basically how to use the trimmer by George. This is our completed block 1 for Mystery Quilt, and as you probably are already aware, this is called Dresden 1 for the week 1. And the entire quilt is called Doilies and Dresdens. And I just wanted to point out, I'm going to show you another upcoming block that you'll be able to see in the next few weeks. This is one that we use the optional wool batting. Here is a block that you'll be doing with this quilt, and there's no optional wool batting in there, and I don't know if the camera picks up on it or not, but it is flat as a pancake. And so I encourage you to really give the wool batting a try to see how you like it. Again, it's optional. You can either use it or not use it. It may be something where you may need to raise your presser foot on your machine to be able to get over that wool batting thickness. But we encourage you to send us pictures, put your photos on Facebook, email us your progress. We would love to see what you're doing, and thank you for doing the mystery quilt in 2015.